In July of 2025, Porsche's chief executive officer, Oliver Blume, sent an email that made industry analysts freeze. Quote, "Our business model no longer works in its current form." End of quote. For most companies, that would be concerning. For Porsche, a brand synonymous with precision, performance, and profit, it was earth-shattering. Within months, the numbers confirmed everyone's worst fears. Operating profit collapsed 99%, not 99 million, 99%, from over 4 billion euros to barely 40 million. But here's what almost nobody remembers. This isn't Porsche's first brush with death. 32 years ago, in 1993, Porsche was weeks away from bankruptcy. The company that invented the sports car was about to disappear. They made a desperate gamble that purists called sacrilege. It saved the company. It made them billions. And it's exactly why they're collapsing today. This is the story of how Porsche cheated death once, and why the same playbook won't save them this time. To understand Porsche's 2025 crisis, you have to go back to 1993, because what happened then created the seeds for what's happening now. Most business stories follow a simple arc: rise, peak, fall. But Porsche's story is different. It's a loop. A company that nearly died, resurrected itself through controversial decisions, grew into an empire, and then discovered that the very strategies that saved them would eventually destroy them. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to trace that loop. You'll see how Porsche went from bankruptcy to billions, how they made choices that seemed brilliant at the time but contained fatal flaws, and how those flaws took decades to emerge. But when they did, they collapsed 99% of the company's profit in a single year. This isn't just a story about one car company. It's about what happens when survival instincts override long-term thinking, when expansion becomes addiction, and when yesterday's solutions become tomorrow's problems. By the end, you'll understand not just what went wrong at Porsche, but what this crisis reveals about the future of luxury manufacturing, the rise of China, and the hidden dangers of success itself. Let's begin in 1993, when Porsche was dying. If you looked at Porsche in the 1980s, you'd see a company that appeared invincible. The 911 was iconic. The 935 and 944 turbo models dominated racing. The brand was synonymous with performance, but behind the gleaming exterior, Porsche was fragile. The company was tiny compared to competitors. In 1992, Porsche sold just 14,000 cars globally. For context, BMW sold over 500,000. Mercedes sold over 550,000. Even struggling British brand Jaguar sold more cars than Porsche. More dangerously, Porsche was essentially a one-product company. The 911 represented nearly 90% of sales. If anything happened to that single model, the entire company would collapse. And then, something did happen. In 1992 and 1993, multiple crises hit Porsche simultaneously. First, the global recession. Luxury spending cratered. The target market for $100,000 sports cars simply evaporated overnight. Second, currency disaster. The Deutsche Mark strengthened dramatically against the dollar. Porsche's American sales, critical to survival, became 30% more expensive virtually overnight. Sales in the United States collapsed from 10,000 cars annually to just 3,000. Third, competition intensified. Japanese manufacturers like Honda with the NSX and Toyota planning the Supra were creating sports cars with comparable performance at lower prices. The European recession didn't hit them as hard. Fourth, the 911 was aging. The 964 model launched in 1989 was Porsche's answer, but it was expensive to develop and expensive to build. Each sale lost money. By early 1993, Porsche's situation was terminal. Sales had dropped 60% in just 4 years, from 50,000 cars in 1986 to barely 14,000 in 1992. The company was burning through $150 million per year in losses. Production lines sat empty. Engineers were laid off. Dealerships closed. Financial analysts began writing obituaries. The consensus was clear. Porsche would either be acquired by a larger manufacturer or would disappear entirely. The 911 would become a collectible relic. Ferry Porsche, son of founder Ferdinand Porsche, watched the company bearing his family name spiral toward extinction. In 1993, Porsche's leadership gathered for what many believed would be their final strategic meeting. They needed a new product desperately, but they had no money for development. They had no capacity for risk, and they had no time. The plan they devised was controversial, risky, and went against everything Porsche supposedly stood for. They would create a cheaper Porsche. The purists were horrified. Porsche meant exclusivity, premium pricing. The 911. Adding a budget model would dilute the brand, they argued. It would cheapen Porsche's image. Loyal customers would feel betrayed. But the alternative was bankruptcy. The project was named the Boxster. It would be a mid-engine roadster powered by a new flat-six engine. Critically, it would share components with the 911 to reduce costs. The same headlights, the same interior parts, the same platform architecture where possible. The gamble was profound. If the Boxster succeeded, it would save Porsche. If it failed, or worse, if it cannibalized 911 sales, the company would collapse even faster. Development began in late 1993. Production was planned for 1996. Porsche had 3 years to survive long enough to see if their desperate plan would work. 3 years is a long time when you're losing money every single day. The Boxster debuted at the Detroit Auto Show in January 1996. The automotive press was skeptical. This was Porsche's salvation? A car that looked good but shared parts with the 911? A affordable Porsche that still cost $50,000? Then people drove it. The Boxster was brilliant. The mid-engine layout created near-perfect weight distribution. The handling was sharp, responsive, alive. The flat-six engine sounded glorious, distinctly Porsche, despite being smaller and less powerful than the 911 motor. Most importantly, it felt like a Porsche, not a cheaper Porsche, just a different Porsche. Orders flooded in. The first year, Porsche sold over 16,000 Boxsters. Combined with 911 sales, total company volume jumped to 30,000 cars, more than double the 1993 low point. By 1997, Porsche was profitable again. The company that had been circling the bankruptcy drain was suddenly healthy. The Boxster had worked, but the leadership learned something dangerous from this experience. Moving down market could save the company. With the Boxster success, Porsche leadership grew confident. If one controversial product could save them, perhaps another could make them truly secure. In 1996, even as Boxster orders climbed, Porsche announced something unthinkable. They would build an SUV. The outrage was immediate and visceral. Porsche purists erupted. An SUV? A Porsche SUV? It was sacrilege. Porsche made sports cars, low, sleek, fast machines designed for driving pleasure. An SUV was the opposite of everything Porsche represented. Porsche has lost its mind, automotive journalists wrote. This will destroy the brand, enthusiasts declared. Ferdinand Piëch, who had left Porsche years earlier to lead Volkswagen Group, called it a mistake. The critics were loud, but Porsche leadership had seen something in the Boxster experience. Their brand was more elastic than anyone realized. Customers would buy a Porsche as long as it drove like a Porsche, even if it didn't look like one. More pragmatically, they saw the business case. The SUV market was exploding. Mercedes was preparing to launch the M-Class. BMW would soon have the X5. Range Rover was selling everything they built. If Porsche could create a performance SUV, one that handled like a sports car but offered SUV practicality, they could access an enormous market. The project was named Cayenne. Development began in earnest in 1998, in partnership with Volkswagen Group to share costs and platform development. The engineering challenge was formidable. How do you make a 2-ton vehicle drive like a Porsche? In September 2002, the first Cayenne rolled off the production line in Leipzig, Germany. Initial press reviews were mixed. It handled well for an SUV. The turbo model was shockingly fast, 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. But it was expensive, starting at $55,000, and it still looked unusual. None of that mattered. The Cayenne became an instant sales phenomenon. First-year sales exceeded expectations. By 2003, Porsche sold 25,000 Cayennes. By 2007, Cayenne sales outnumbered 911 sales for the first time in company history. The financial impact was transformative. Each Cayenne generated solid profit margins. Volume growth reduced per-unit development costs across the entire company. Porsche could now invest more aggressively in technology, manufacturing, and new models. In 2003, Porsche generated 5.5 billion euros in revenue, up from 2.5 billion in 1993. Operating margin exceeded 15%, among the highest in the automotive industry. The Cayenne didn't just save Porsche, it made Porsche rich. With the Cayenne printing money, Porsche leadership saw a clear path forward: keep expanding. In 2014, the Macan launched, a smaller, more affordable SUV. It immediately became Porsche's best-selling model, moving over 90,000 units in its first full year. In 2019, the Taycan arrived, Porsche's first fully electric vehicle. It was technologically ambitious, expensive to develop, but positioned Porsche as a leader in electric performance. In 2020, the company showed no signs of slowing. Plans were announced for electric versions of the Macan and Cayenne. Discussions began about expanding into new markets and new price points. By 2020, Porsche was selling nearly 300,000 vehicles annually, 20 times the volume from the dark days of 1993. Revenue exceeded 28 billion euros. Operating profit exceeded 4 billion euros annually. The company that had nearly died 3 decades earlier was now one of the most profitable automakers in the world, with one of the highest profit per vehicle ratios in the luxury segment. The strategy was clear, proven, and seemed unstoppable. But inside that success, 3 problems were growing. Problems that would take years to become visible, but when they did, they would collapse 99% of Porsche's profit in a single year. The first fracture was demographic. When the Boxster and Cayenne launched, they brought new customers to Porsche, often younger, often first-time luxury buyers. These customers didn't have the same emotional connection to the 911 heritage. They liked Porsche because the products were good, but they weren't brand loyalists. By 2020, Porsche's traditional customer base was aging rapidly. At Porsche Club meetings, as one former 911 owner noted in online forums, the average age was climbing. Lots of gray hair. Youth was a minority. These traditional customers had disposable income and brand loyalty, but they were dying off, and Porsche hadn't successfully cultivated a younger generation to replace them, partly because prices had climbed so high. The second fracture was strategic positioning. The move down market had worked in the 90s when Porsche was tiny and fighting for survival. But by 2020, Porsche wasn't tiny anymore. They were selling 300,000 cars annually. At that volume, exclusivity becomes difficult. When everyone can buy a Macan, is it still special? When Porsches are everywhere, does the badge still signal the same thing? Porsche tried to solve this by moving upmarket on price. A base 911 jumped from $90,000 in 2000 to $132,000 by 2025. Premium models easily exceeded $200,000, but this created a trap. Younger buyers couldn't afford entry-level models. Traditional customers who could afford the prices felt they were being gouged. The middle ground disappeared. The third fracture was technological. The transition to electric vehicles required massive investment, billions in new platforms, battery technology, charging infrastructure, and manufacturing retooling. These costs hit simultaneously. With slowing EV demand growth, the Taycan sold well initially, but demand dropped 49% in 2024. Porsche had spent billions developing electric capability, but consumers weren't buying at the rate projected. Worse, the EV transition played directly into the hands of Chinese competitors who had built their automotive industries around electric platforms from day one. By 2024, these 3 fractures were all cracking simultaneously. But Porsche leadership, focused on quarterly results and expansion metrics, didn't see the structural instability. Then came 2025. In early 2025, multiple cascading failures hit Porsche at once. The China shock, Deliveries in China collapsed 42% year-over-year. It wasn't just a recession. Chinese consumers were actively choosing domestic brands over German ones. Xiaomi's SU7 offered comparable performance to a Taycan at half the price. NIO's SUVs had better technology than the Cayenne at lower cost. Zeekr and BYD were flooding the market with premium electric vehicles that felt modern, sophisticated, and advanced. Chinese buyers weren't choosing heritage anymore. They were choosing intelligence, value, and domestic pride. The German badge that once guaranteed a sale now felt outdated. The pricing backlash. In Western markets, consumers openly rebelled against Porsche's pricing. A 19 C4S 911 that cost $125,000 in 2019 now cost over $160,000, a $35,000 increase in 6 years. Social media filled with stories of dealer markups, waitlists that lasted years, and service costs that felt predatory. Former loyal customers walked away. Younger buyers never arrived. The volume problem. With sales falling, Porsche's fixed costs became crushing. The company had built production capacity for 300,000 units annually. Running at 260,000 units created inefficiencies throughout the system. Factory utilization dropped. Per unit costs rose. The economies of scale that had driven profitability reversed. The EV investment hole. Porsche had committed over €3 billion to electric vehicle development, but with Taycan sales falling and EV market growth slowing, the return on that investment disappeared. The company found itself with expensive electric capability, massive development costs, and consumers who didn't want to buy at the volumes projected. By the third quarter of 2025, the numbers were catastrophic. Operating profit had fallen from €4.04 billion to barely €40 million, a 99% collapse. In July 2025, CEO Oliver Bloom sent that email to employees. Quote, "Our business model no longer works in its current form." End quote. What he meant was clear to anyone paying attention. The strategy that saved Porsche in the 90s, moving down market, adding SUVs, pursuing volume growth, had run its course. Porsche was now trapped. Too big to be exclusive, too expensive to be accessible, too invested in electric to pivot quickly, too late to fend off Chinese competition. The playbook that rescued them 30 years earlier wouldn't work this time. Porsche's response has been swift but uncertain. The company announced plans to refocus on core models, code for reducing variety and complexity. They've emphasized hybrid powertrains as a bridge strategy, acknowledging that full electric transition will take longer than expected. They've started cutting production targets to reduce volume and theoretically restore exclusivity. But the core problem remains unsolved. Porsche built an empire on volume growth. Scaling back means lower revenue, which means less investment capability, which means falling further behind competitors in technology development. It's a vicious cycle. And unlike 1993, there's no obvious escape hatch. No next Boxster waiting to rescue them. The market has fundamentally changed. In 1993, Porsche faced a crisis, but the automotive world was stable. They could create a cheaper sports car and find customers. They could build an SUV in an emerging category and dominate. In 2025, the automotive world itself is fracturing. Electric versus combustion. Chinese manufacturers challenging German dominance. Subscription models and software disrupting traditional ownership. Younger generations questioning whether expensive cars matter at all. Porsche can't simply create one new product and solve these problems. The market that rescued them before no longer exists in the same form. The lesson here extends far beyond one car company. It's about what happens when survival strategies become growth strategies, become existential liabilities. Porsche escaped death by expanding down market. That expansion made them rich. That wealth made them ambitious. That ambition made them vulnerable. And that vulnerability brought them back to crisis. It's a loop that countless companies fall into. Yesterday's solution becomes today's problem. The strategy that saved you eventually traps you. Success creates the conditions for failure. So what should Porsche do? Some analysts say they need to dramatically cut volume, raise prices further, and return to extreme exclusivity, essentially become Ferrari. Others argue they need to compete more aggressively on price and technology, essentially become a volume premium brand like BMW. Both paths have risks, and both paths require Porsche to abandon something fundamental about what they've become over the past 30 years. Maybe the real lesson is this: there is no permanent solution. Markets evolve, competition intensifies. What works today won't work forever. The only constant is change. Porsche survived their first near-death experience by being willing to break their own rules, to do things purists called sacrilege, to risk everything on controversial bets. Whether they can do it again, whether the Boxster Cayenne playbook has one more iteration left, remains to be seen. One thing is certain: the next chapter of Porsche's story will be different from anything that came before, because this time, the crisis isn't just about Porsche. It's about the entire luxury automotive paradigm facing an existential test. And how they respond will shape not just their future, but the future of every manufacturer trying to survive in a world where heritage matters less than intelligence, where brand power fades faster than ever, and where the next generation of competition comes from places you never expected. The question isn't whether Porsche can survive. The question is what Porsche will mean when they do.